All right, today we're going to talk about Piaget's theory of development. Now this handsome fella right here is Jean Piaget. Piaget is one of the true titans in the field of psychology. He's one of the first psychologists to understand the idea that children develop differently and that children's behaviors and development should be studied in order to give us a better idea of how to raise and educate them to produce healthier, more productive adults. Piaget constructed his theory of development by studying his own children as they grew older and understanding how their behavioral changes changed who they were as adults. The most famous aspect of Piaget's theory is its discontinuous nature. Piaget believed that children move through very strict hierarchical stages as they age, and these stages were marked by several properties. The first is that each stage had its own unique behavioral change, and that children at different stages would act differently and have different capabilities. The second is that the new abilities gained at each stage could be broadly applied to a variety of topics and contexts and a variety of areas of cognition, and were not unique to any one area of cognition. The third is that he believed that there was a brief transitional period between each stage where a child might regress in behavior or act in a chaotic way as they were gearing up to transition into a new stage. Finally, Piaget believed that his stages were invariant, meaning everybody has to go through the same stages and nobody is allowed to skip a stage. You have to do it in the same order and you can't skip any of them. So Piaget believed that child behavior could be divided up into 4 main stages of development. And today we're going to talk about each of those 4 stages. The first stage, called the sensory-motor stage, starts at birth and lasts for 2 years. The second stage, the pre-operational stage, starts at 2 years of age and lasts until 7. The concrete operational stage, which is third, starts at 7 years of age and lasts until 12. And the final stage is the formal operational stage, which starts at 12 years of age and continues through the lifespan. In the sensory-motor stage, which starts at birth, children take the basic perceptual and action capabilities that they're born with and develop these abilities to a tremendous degree. Infants are born with what we call reflexes, which we will talk about in a later class, but the basic reflexes like sucking and grasping, Piaget believed these reflexes were developed into larger behavioral patterns, that they served as the foundation for larger, more complex behaviors. Piaget also believed that this is where children learn propositional attitudes, meaning they make theories about their world and test the theories in order to determine what's true of the world and what isn't. The hallmark of this stage is what we call object permanence, and is perhaps the most famous part of this stage of development. Object permanence is simply the idea that children who are very young need to actively perceive something to understand that it exists. And once they stop perceiving it, they stop believing that it exists. So let's show you an example of this. This infant really wants to get at this watch because she thinks it's fun and interesting looking, and she crawls towards it, but then mom covers it up with a towel, and the child simply loses track of it. She loses the ability to understand that it still exists even though she can't see it anymore. Now the child has grown older, and when mom covers up the toy she wants, she can simply pull the towel away because she recognizes that even though she can't see it, it's still there. So she's gained object permanence, the ability to understand that even when an object is gone, it might still exist, and to have a concept of it even though we can't directly perceive it. In the second stage, the pre-operational stage, which starts at 2 years, children's cognitive performance increases greatly, but it's still marked by some specific cognitive limitations. The biggest acquisition during these years is what's called symbolic representation. And that's simply understanding the idea that an object can stand in for another object and that it doesn't have to literally be what it is. So if you've ever seen a child play with a banana and pretend that it's a telephone, the child at this age understands that even though a banana can't make phone calls, it looks like a phone, and so they can pretend that it is a phone even though it's not literally able to do the things that a phone can. This is a symbolic representation, using an object as a stand-in for another object. Some of the limitations of this stage include egocentrism, which is the fact that children of this age can't put themselves into the shoes of another person. So if you are sitting in your desk right now and you can look up at me, you can visualize what it must be like for me to stand here and look at the class. Children of this age are unable to do that and are narrowly focused on their own perceptual point of view. Another limitation of this age is the conservation concept, which is the fact that children of this age are unable to recognize that even if simple superficial change happens to an object, the fundamental properties of that object remain the same. So let's show an example of this.
I'm going to make 2 rows of quarters.
So the experimenter here is setting up 2 rows of 5 quarters, with each quarter paired off with another, as shown here.
Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or are they the same?
The same.
The same? Okay, now watch. Now, does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or are they the same?
That one has more quarters.
That one has more quarters?
Yeah.
Why does that one have more quarters?
Because it's stretched out.
Because it's stretched out?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in this case, the basic perceptual properties of the 2 rows of quarters are the same. Fundamentally, there's still 5 quarters here and 5 quarters here. But when the experimenter stretches them out, the child loses track of the fundamental property and focuses on the superficial property, which is that one is more stretched out and appears bigger, even though it actually isn't. This is the conservation problem. Children are unable to understand that fundamental properties stay the same even when you change them superficially. The third stage of Piaget's theory is called the concrete operational stage and starts at 7 years. Children start to reason logically about the world here, and they start to be able to solve problems that stymied them earlier, like the conservation problem. They're still limited to concrete situations, so you have to actually put the quarters or the water or whatever in front of them for them to solve it. You can't do abstract problem solving. The main limitation of this stage is that while children are getting better thinking logically, they're still not quite there thinking systematically. So Piaget developed a problem to test this, which is this pendulum problem. And the nature of this problem is simply to ask the child, based on the length of string and the weight in a pendulum, how far will it swing? And in order to figure out the effect of the weight and the string, the easiest way to solve this problem is to keep one property consistent and to vary the other property to see the effect that it has on the setup. This is a systematic thinking problem, and children are terrible at this and will instead guess randomly and oftentimes get the incorrect answer. In the final stage, the formal operational stage, starting at roughly 12 years, children finally start to gain the ability to think abstractly and to start creating hypotheses and testing them in a logical, consistent way. They also start to understand that their actions have consequences and can start to predict what exactly they should do in each situation based on those consequences. So for example, you woke up this morning and had a decision to come to class or to skip class and do something else. And you thought of the consequences of skipping class and the consequences of coming, and everyone here chose to come to class. This is an ability that Piaget thought we didn't get to until 12 years of age. The ability to think through the consequences of our actions in a hypothetical way. So Piaget's theory is so famous, has been around for so long that it attracted several critiques. The first of which is that the stage model depicts children's thinking at each stage as being more consistent than it is, when we know that individually children vary in their capabilities and they vary in their development. And so we know after much more research that children don't hit these age numbers as we would hope. They don't simply transition into a stage as easily as Piaget thought. Second, it turns out that infants and young children are actually quite smart, and that many of Piaget's problems are simply way too difficult for the age range. So Piaget didn't recognize that infants are actually quite good at things. Third, Piaget basically had nothing at all to say about how the world of the child influences the child. He was focused almost exclusively on how the child changed his or her world. And so there's almost nothing in Piaget's theory about like parent interactions and changes based on where the child grows up and so forth. Finally, Piaget was very vague about the mechanisms that drive change and cause us to move through each stage. He simply believed that the stages unfolded innately and naturally, but never came up with a reason for why it is we should go through the stages that we do according to his theory. All right, so that's everything that I have. Are there any questions?